Over the many years of EA's existence, the games publisher has murdered many talented game studios. Here are the top 10 studios EA has killed over the years. Mythic Entertainment was formed in 1995 and became notable in 2001 when they released Dark Age of Camelot, an MMORPG that far surpassed any sales expectations the company had. They were purchased by EA in 2006 with the intention being that Mythic would continue making MMOs in order to compete with Blizzard's juggernaut World of Warcraft. In 2014, however, they were tasked with something a bit different: make a new Dungeon Keeper game for mobile. The game was to be free to play and as such included heavy use of microtransactions, so heavy in fact that some basic mechanics of the game would make you wait up to a whole 24 hours to complete unless you purchase some gems, which are the game's form of currency. Needless to say, the backlash from the gaming community was severe, not just because of the abuse of microtransactions, but also because Dungeon Keeper was a beloved series that hadn't seen a new entry since 1999. Mythic was forced to defend EA's decision to include microtransactions in their game, and as a result of the controversy, EA closed the studio later that same year. DreamWorks Interactive was formed in 1995 as a joint venture by Microsoft and Steven Spielberg. In 1999, the studio released the extremely popular Medal of Honor. This game did so well that it caught EA's attention and they bought the studio in 2000. Renaming it EA Los Angeles, the studio's job was to make Medal of Honor games, with focus later shifting to broader projects at the decline of World War II shooters. After Infinity Ward's Call of Duty became a smash hit, EA scrambled to play catch-up, something which they must have been extra sore about since Infinity Ward was made up of ex-DreamWorks Interactive employees. Just like with Mythic and World of Warcraft, this trend chasing is ultimately what led to the closure of the company. The studio was renamed again to Danger Close Games and was told to make a fresh, new Medal of Honor. This surfaced as the 2010 Medal of Honor reboot. Medal of Honor 2010 sold well enough to warrant a sequel, which became Medal of Honor Warfighter and released in 2012. And this game severely underperformed, both in a critical and commercial respect. The next year, Danger Close Games was merged with DICE, effectively ending the studio formerly known as DreamWorks Interactive and discontinuing the once well-respected Medal of Honor series they had created. Bioware Montreal was formed in 2009, with the intention of simply making DLC for Mass Effect 3. After the original Mass Effect trilogy was concluded, however, Bioware proper decided to move to a new IP, which we now know as Anthem. EA, however, also wanted to continue the Mass Effect series with a new trilogy, and that's how an almost brand new studio with little to no experience ended up developing the sequel to one of the largest franchises of the last decade. Mass Effect Andromeda was plagued with development issues, and when the game finally emerged in early 2017, it was clear that the game was not finished. After being critically panned and selling well under expectations, all planned DLC was cancelled. Updates followed soon after, and not long after that, EA announced that Bioware Montreal would be merged with EA Motive. And while no one from Bioware lost their jobs in the merge, it does mean that we probably won't see another Mass Effect game for a very long time. Origin Systems was founded in 1983 and has a very notable history. Origin created many series that are considered genre-defining classics today, such as the Ultima and Wing Commander series. They also published the first System Shock game. On top of this gaming pedigree, the company was also the beginning of many well-known game developers such as John Romero, who would go on to co-found id Software, Warren Spector, who would later have a hand in the first Thief game and would also create the first Deus Ex, and Richard Garriott, aka Lord British, creator of the Ultima series of games and the coiner of the term massively multiplayer online role-playing game. All this success Origin was experiencing attracted the attention of EA, who bought the company in 1992. At the time, EA was happy to let Origin continue on the creative path it had been on for the last decade, but that changed in 1997. On the 24th of September, Origin released Ultima Online to the general gaming public. The game would go on to become one of the most popular MMOs ever created, and still has an active user base today. After Ultima Online's smash success, EA changed Origin's creative direction. They were to make online-only games with the exception of Ultima 9, which was still in development at the time of Ultima Online's release. Most of Origin's resources, however, were diverted away from Ultima 9, including team members, and this meant that the game shipped with cut or incomplete content and numerous, often game-breaking bugs. Upon seeing the reception of Ultima 9, EA cancelled all of Origin's future projects aside from Ultima Online expansions until finally, in 2004, EA shut the studio's doors. The company lives on, however, through EA's Steam competitor Origin, which launched in 2011 and uses the same logo that the company originally trademarked. Black Box Games was formed in 1998 and made many different games for many different publishers, one of which was several games in the Need for Speed franchise for EA. EA decided to acquire the company in 2002 during the development of Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2. Black Box would go on to create more entries in the Need for Speed franchise, such as Underground 1 and 2 and the original Need for Speed Most Wanted, and would help make the franchise one of the most successful in gaming, selling over 150 million copies across all titles. On top of creating almost yearly blockbusters in the form of the Need for Speed games, Black Box also developed all 3 of the Skate games, all of which were commercially successful, but Skate 3 in particular reached a near legendary status amongst fans. The success of the Skate series couldn't prevent the decline of the Need for Speed franchise, however, which peaked at 2005's Most Wanted. After seeing Need for Speed's continually declining sales, EA made the decision to switch development of the Need for Speed franchise from Black Box to burnout developer Criterion after 2011's Need for Speed The Run. EA announced that Black Box Games would refocus on smaller, online, free-to-play and mobile games, however the studio was shut down in 2013. Pandemic Studios was formed in 1998 and created a few games for Activision. In 2007, EA bought Pandemic's parent company, VG Holding, which also happened to be the parent company of another game development studio, Bioware. Pandemic created the Destroy All Humans games, and they also created the much-loved original Star Wars Battlefront 1 and 2. However, despite these successes, a string of slightly underwhelming games in the eyes of EA meant that Pandemic was on thin ice. Their next big project was to be a tie-in game for the Dark Knight movie. Development was fraught with problems, which resulted in Pandemic missing the movie release deadline of July 2008. Development continued, however, with a new target set for the Blu-ray release, a scant 6 months later. Problems continued, however, and in October 2008 the project was cancelled. EA closed the Australian arm of the Pandemic branch that Christmas, with the primary American branch facing the same fate the following year. Westwood Studios formed in 1985 and created many different types of strategy games. It wouldn't be until 1995, however, with the release of Command & Conquer, that the studio would begin to attract significant attention. EA bought the company 3 years later in order to obtain the rights to their Command & Conquer series. However, they were disappointed with 2002's Command & Conquer Renegade and Earth and Beyond, and made the decision to lay off most of the employees and transfer the remaining ones in 2003, killing the studio only 6 years after EA had acquired it. Visceral Games differs from most other studios on this list, since Visceral has always been an in-house developer for EA. Formerly known as EA Redwood Shores, the studio made mostly licensed games based on the Lord of the Rings, James Bond, and Tiger Woods intellectual properties. Eventually, however, Redwood Shores would receive the green light from EA to make an original product, and in 2008, EA Redwood Shores would release the horror classic Dead Space. Upon Dead Space's success, EA renamed the studio to Visceral Games and tasked them with making a sequel. Dead Space 2, released in 2011 to critical and apparent commercial success, but the third game in the series wouldn't be so lucky. For Dead Space 3, much of what fans loved about the first 2 games was changed or removed completely. The game no longer had a focus on horror, but was now more akin to an action thriller. The game featured co-op for the first time, and the game also included microtransactions in the form of purchasable ammunition for weapons. These aspects were enough to deter prospective consumers from the game, and Dead Space 3 ended up selling less than its predecessor. Visceral's next projects were The Army of Two, The Devil's Cartel, which sold poorly, and Battlefield Hardline, which also failed to meet expectations. After so many commercial flops, it was clear that Visceral was on shaky ground. During this time though, EA had acquired the license to Star Wars games in 2013, and Visceral pitched an open-world third-person action game set in the Star Wars universe to EA. EA greenlit the idea and Visceral got to work. They brought on board Amy Hennig for this project, who was a former writer for the Uncharted series, and with her, the game changed from open world to a linear story-based game. Early development was going well, but this changed in 2015 with the release of Battlefront. EA diverted many resources away from Visceral to create a Battlefront sequel, and this left the development of their Star Wars games stalled. They knew they had to make a demo to convince EA to provide more funding to their project. It wouldn't be until April 2017 that EA would see the demo, but the time was used wisely because EA decided to continue with the development of Visceral's game, with the exception that they would show another demo 6 months later. And so it was in October 2017 that Visceral came to EA once again with their new demo. EA's response to what Visceral had brought them? Shut down the whole studio. EA announced that the game would change to be more in line with the gameplay of Destiny in the upcoming Anthem and move development duties to EA Motive. Visceral, however, and the Dead Space name would be no more. Bullfrog Productions was formed in 1987 by Les Edgar and the now rather infamous Peter Molyneux. In 1989, they would be put on the map by the release of Populous, a game that is often credited with inventing the God game genre. Bullfrog would continue to develop a string of widely successful games such as Syndicate in 1993 and Theme Park in 1994, until their publisher EA would decide to buy them outright in 1995. Not long after their acquisition, however, Peter Molyneux decided to leave the company in 1997 with many other Bullfrog members to form a new studio, Lionhead. The last game he worked on for Bullfrog was Dungeon Keeper. After Molyneux left, many more Bullfrog employees followed suit, many of which doing so because they felt Bullfrog had become too corporate since its acquisition. EA, in turn, failed to understand Molyneux's role within the company, and their various replacements for him produced subpar games until, in 2001, Bullfrog was merged into EA UK. The last game to bear their logo was Theme Park Inc. Maxis Software appeared in 1987 and was founded by Jeff Braun and Will Wright with the intention of simply publishing their SimCity game. After SimCity's massive success, Maxis attempted to capture lightning in a bottle twice and created many spin-off sim games. These included Sim Earth, Sim Ant, Sim Life, Sim Farm, Sim Town, Sim Copter, Sim Golf, Sim Tune, Sim Park, and Sim Safari, not including the sim games that they helped publish instead of develop. However, none of these would be able to do anywhere near as well as SimCity, and in the mid-90s, Maxis was facing the prospect of going bankrupt. Not even the 1993 sequel to SimCity could save them. And in 1997, Maxis agreed to be acquired by EA. With the backing of a publisher to provide funding, the company decided to make one last try to spin off the SimCity, and 3 years later, The Sims appeared. The Sims became a smash success, in some ways eclipsing SimCity entirely, and a sequel was released 4 years later. However, always keen to try their hand at something new, Maxis got to work on a new game, which would eventually become 2008's Spore. Spore failed to meet expectations upon its release, and a spin-off in 2011 titled Dark Spore did even worse. And so, with their last 2 titles being failures in the eyes of EA, Maxis began work on the SimCity reboot. The new SimCity game released in 2013 to overwhelming negativity, not because the game was bad, but because of EA's requirement that the game must always be connected to an online server, even when playing the game in single player. This decision was made to help prevent piracy of the game, but it ended up hindering the game more than helping. Upon launch, EA's server simply couldn't handle the huge influx of traffic, and as a result, many people couldn't play the game they had just bought. SimCity 2013 became a joke in the online PC community, with EA receiving very public backlash for the move. 2 years later, after the SimCity controversy, Maxis was forced to shut its doors. So there you have it, the top 10 studios that EA has killed over its lifetime. Who do you think is next? Do you think there's any studios that EA owns that might be next on the chopping block? Is it Bioware? Is it DICE? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if you learnt something, subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.